Welcome to the Dark Shadows Podcast with your co-hosts Vicky Ray, Tom Diamond, and Keith Chowgle, bringing you all the odd goings-on from Collinsport, Maine.
Hello, welcome to Literary License Podcast, and today we're discussing Dark Shadows, episodes 286 to 309, and today we have with us Vicky Ray. Hello, Vicky.
Hello, everybody.
Jesse Foltz. Hello, Jesse.
Hey, how's it going?
Tom Diamond. Hello, Tom.
Hello, everybody, and I hope everybody is doing well and you are all safe.
And today we have a special guest co-host with us today, Patrick McCrae. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, it's good to be here.
How are you doing today, Patrick?
I am fine as frog's hair. Thank you very much.
And a warm welcome to you. So before we get started, we like to do our Thorns and Roses, which, of course, if you're a new listener, Thorns and Roses are basically our high parts of the week and our low parts of the week. And let's start with Jesse. What is your high point of the week and your low point, your roses and thorns?
Well, I ventured out into the unknown for the first time in how long since the pandemic?
Did you go to the store? Did you go to Walmart?
Walgreens.
I don't. I just did stuff online. But I went to the store the other day, and it was kind of interesting. I don't like the masks, especially in the heat. They're kind of they're miserable. So that was my high point, I guess. It was an adventure. And my thorn, well, I'm actually kind of super annoyed by like modern pop music, especially Lady Gaga's album thing. Very, very disappointing. I just think it's a waste because she has like a phenomenal voice, and I think she should be doing something like rock or metal or even acoustic or old Hollywood jazz kind of a sound with Tony Bennett. That's better than her new stuff, in my opinion. So
I didn't get her name. Who'd you say, Jesse?
Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga. Okay.
Yeah.
She's gone from Lady Gaga to Lady Goo Goo. So, Vicky, what's your roses and thorn of the week?
Well, my son Tyler, shout out to Tyler and Liz in Montana, turned me on to Channel Zero. I've watched the first season on Shudder, and I'm just starting the second season. And it's awesome. I just love it. It's just right up there with Joe Bob Briggs, but he has all those crazy other films that he shows. He's my new thing I love too, is watching The Last Drive-In. Those movies are some of them are so bad that they're just epic, and they're so bad they're brilliant, so you have to watch them. Like
Did you
Chopping
watch the
Mall.
Heathers? Did you watch the Heathers broadcast?
The Heathers. Yeah. I love that movie. I don't know why. I just do. I love the ending, so I won't give that away. And I guess my thorn would be just that the world is on fire and it's turned into a real shit show and everybody needs to get their shit straight. Other than that, I'm good.
And Tom, what's your roses and thorn of the week?
Well, Rose is things are. Things are coming along. I'm just very glad to be very busy between all the projects that I have, and in terms of balancing things, and of course, and I never mentioned this before, and I'm not doing this to BS Keith, but doing this podcast is a rose. And I am very pleased actually to be down. Keith is about to put on his finery and his best, and those fans who can't see him, he's smiling and blushing and all kind of turning fuchsia.
He's not blushing, he's preening.
Oh, is that what he is? Like a peacock? Are you a peacock? Are you strutting your stuff, Keith?
Of course.
But it is. It's a continuing pleasure to do this, and and it's a great gig. So that being said, and being able to balance things, I think that's very important in terms of maintaining a work-life balance. And I'm in school, as I told you, also, and so that part's good. My thorn is my dear fiance is away this week working in Venice, Florida, and Sarasota, Florida. And she is, of course, protecting herself with a mask and so forth. But she's a nurse, but she doesn't deal with patients directly. So I miss her, and she's coming back in a couple of days. And so I'm, so that's
You got to learn how to work the can opener, huh?
Yeah, what can I'm a microwave expert. I got to tell you. Oh God, I was so happy when those microwaves were invented.
Who the big microwave expert was back in the 70s? Who wrote microwave cookbooks? Richard Deacon. Richard Deacon. Mel from Dick Van
Dyke. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, no way. I didn't know that.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Well, I never read his, but thank God for the microwave. I just didn't know how I was going to do with the broilers, those old-fashioned broilers where you had to cook lamb chops in for like 40 minutes. I still remember that. A lot of people who were not around then don't know what broilers are, I think. So, but anyway, that's my rose and that's my thorn.
And what about yourself, Patrick? What's your thorn and rose of the week?
I am swell. I am great. And I have the whole world on a plate.
The plate.
Starting now. Everything's fabulous. I'm still thrilled that, speaking of Joe Bob Briggs, on his Heather's broadcast, Collinsport Historical Society got the Silver Bolo Award, which was
awesome.
Fantastic. Yeah. We're real happy about
all right.
that. And had a good day book this week. It was a weird day book to write because I talked about the big moral dilemma on the show that I think viewers have to face, which is just before this stretch of episodes, which has to do with when Barnabas kidnaps Maggie. And that, you're supposed to cheer for Maggie to get out, but once you've seen the entire series, you kind of feel a little bad for Barnabas. And it's a whole strange vertigo riff. So I enjoyed doing that, and this is certainly a great big rose in that rose bush. And no thorns whatsoever.
Oh, you're a lucky boy. Patrick, of course, for those fans who do not know, is with the Collinsport Historical Society website, and he has crawled over the crypt in order to join us today. And Patrick is very accomplished in terms of 80s stage productions, and the winner of the Rondo Award for Writer of the Year in 2017. Wow. I memorized this. I memorized this script. Now, Pat, remember the check is coming to me now, Pat. But seriously, so just to give you guys,
it's courtesy of Jim Pearson. You can contact him if it's late.
Oh, so you got to deal with Jim, huh? Well, we got
as far as you know.
Very good. Go ahead.
Well, my roses and thorn of the week has to be my roses be Flame Tree Press, who've been giving me a bunch of books to read for
I noticed
to do reviews on. Jonathan Jans, who we've had on the show, his new one, The Raven, is a fantastic book, and Hunter Shea, who's been on our show as well, has come out with Misfits. But I have to sit there and say, for people who like classic the horror genre and like stuff in the Victorian era, Stephen Hopkinson and Melissa Pruzzi have written Stoker Wilde, which was one of my favorite books, which is a story of Bram Stoker and Oscar Wilde. And what they do is they write it as correspondence and letters going back and forth between the two, as they find that there are vampires in Victorian London, and how and it's like fiction mixed with fact. And they've done a really, really good job. And they just come out with a sequel called Stoker's Wild West, which if anyone knows about Bram Stoker, is that Bram Stoker was head of the Lyceum Theater, and him and Henry Irving, along with Oscar Wilde, came to America and did one of the first London tours across the Old West. So what they've done is they've taken that as the back frame of the story, and you have Mark Twain doing like cameo pictures, but like letters from Mark Twain to them, Calamity Jane, and then they find that some of the vampires have escaped from London and are making their way across the Old West. So I suggest that everyone read these two fantastic books, which are Stoker's Wild and Stoker Wilde's West. So
that really sounds good.
Awesome.
And my thorn, I'm still got a problem with menopausal mothers at the moment. And menopausal mothers, for people out there, are women who've had children like late in life, and they're like totally protective of them. So basically they wear the gloves and the mask with a great big stick, screaming social distancing while their kids wearing nothing and crawling all over you. I think on Wednesday I was getting off the tube, and I don't wear a mask or glove or anything like that. I work in the healthcare service, everyone knows. I go up on the COVID wards now. I figured if I get sick, I'll just get a couple weeks off. Yay, be a winner for me. Obviously, I must be immune because I'm still going to work. But this woman just looked at me. Her kid, meanwhile, on the tube was like sitting next to me, all over me. I was like, oh my God, really? And then I get off the tube, and the mother gets off the tube with the gloves and the mask and everything like that. She looks at me, she goes, "You should be wearing a mask," and points this stick at me going, "Social distancing." And I go, "Get away from me, I'm going to lick your face." She shut up, and I just went to work. But they're like crawling all over London at the moment. You're just like, come on, people. I mean,
sound medical advice. Sound medical advice.
But that was my thorn. But though it did make me laugh, and then people that I did told that to work actually agreed with me. So yay. So what we're going to do now, we're going to cut to Story Geek, and Story Geek are going to tell you what to be watching during the COVID lockdown, what you can watch for free through Netflix, Amazon Prime, or regular download, and tell you what the highlights of this week are. So take it away, Story Geek.
What movies and TV shows should you be watching the week of May 25th? I'm Jay Shear, co-host of the Story Geeks podcast, and here are the movies and TV shows you can watch from home. We've only got one new movie that was actually out in wide release, then was available as an early purchase option, and that is The Invisible Man. I haven't seen it, and it doesn't really appeal to me personally, but I will say that my friends who have seen it really enjoyed it. The Invisible Man has a 72 on Metacritic. New to the streaming services, we've got one new movie coming out on Netflix this week that has got a lot of critical attention, and that is Uncut Gems, which stars Adam Sandler in a very serious role. It's on Netflix now. It has a 90 on Metacritic, which is a fantastic score. Over on Amazon Prime, you've got two new options. Rocket Man, the Elton John biopic, is now available on Amazon Prime. That has a 69 on Metacritic. Also available on Amazon Prime, Logan Lucky. Logan Lucky is basically sort of like a redneck version of Ocean's 11, for lack of a better description. It has a star-studded cast, and I have seen it, and it's really pretty good. Logan Lucky has a 78 on Metacritic. Disney Plus has recently added The Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is a stop-motion animation film from Wes Anderson. It stars George Clooney, Bill Murray, and Meryl Streep, among others. It has an 83 on Metacritic. Hulu has also added Rocket Man, so if you don't have Amazon Prime, you can check out Rocket Man over on Hulu. And I should also mention that HBO has now launched HBO Max, and there are a ton of movies that were just added over there. So if you're interested in HBO Max, I would go check out the full list of everything that was added. It's half a mile long. It's lots of new stuff over on HBO Max. As for my pick, Logan Lucky is a fun film that I think a lot of people slept on, so I do recommend that. Meanwhile, since I've seen that, I'll probably check out The Fantastic Mr. Fox, as I've heard really good things about that film. This week on the latest The Story Geeks podcast, we talk about some of the films that have made a personal impact on us. Films that caused us to think about the world differently or shaped our perspective in profound ways. You can find The Story Geeks podcast on your preferred podcast provider. Until next week, this has been Jay Shear from the Story Geeks podcast, and I hope you have fun streaming movies and TV shows from home.
Hello, welcome back to Literary License Podcast. Where we're going to cut to now is two segments. We're going to do Out of the Shadows by Tom Diamond, and we'll be going to Into the Shadows. and a special book price that is available to you for during this lockdown time for 99 cents currently, and will be going to $9.99 in hardback form. So catch your books now. So take it away, Story Geek.
Hello, everybody. Tom Diamond here with a recap of the stars, new stars, as well as the bloopers for the episodes of this block. Gordon Russell is the prominent person, and Gordon Russell will not be seen in front of the camera. He is a new writer on the show. Alice Drummond makes a reappearance as Maggie's nurse in episode 294. Other than that, not too much going on. The Blue Whale extras, Bob O'Connell and George McCoy, are back. Grayson Hall now starts to make a lot of appearances as Julia, and you're going to see her quite often. Anthony George also makes a number of appearances as Burke. Sharon Smith, and apologies to Sharon because I sometimes pronounce her name Smythe. It is Sharon Smith, makes her appearance as Sarah. And Robert Geringer, my favorite Dr. Kildare, as Dr. Woodard. Not too many bloopers on these episodes here, but I'm going to go over them very quickly. But the main thing to talk about is the fact that Dark Shadows finally goes to color in episode 295. That is the first color telecast that you're going to see. There had been a couple of episodes produced in color as an experiment, but they were never telecast prior to that. So if you see a couple of mixed messages, if you're looking at Amazon Prime, and you see a couple of mixed trivia messages to that effect, that is why. They do explain that in episode 295. The famous fire bloopers, I call it, is present in episode 290. And it appeared that while Vicky and Barnabas, Alexander Mulkey and Jonathan Frid were talking in the Collinwood foyer, there was a fire backstage. And that's at around 10 minutes into that episode of 290. You're going to hear a cough, and then around 10 minutes and 40 seconds, you're going to hear two swishes. That's the fire extinguisher that they're using to put out the fire. The two actors got through the scene. They were a little distracted, but I don't think they were that distracted. They were really concentrating, and kudos to them because they really did a good job and they didn't mix up on their lines while the backstage people were putting out the fire. 288, you see when Julia opens the mirror compact in order to see that Barnabas is the vampire has no reflection, and that's straight out of Van Helsing opening up the cigarette case in the Lugosi Dracula. But the way the camera looked, the way the whole room was not reflected in the mirror. The actual scene had Barnabas standing beside the mirror, and that was the whole room. But the mirror only speaks to the candlestick itself, and that is the candlestick. In episode 289, there's a music glitch. When the music box is open, there's a slight pause before it starts to play. And in episode 287, and this is Amazon Prime's closed captioning glitch, Liz is talking, and she says, "You've been caught up in the reminiscences of what's pasted." And she's obviously supposed to say, "You've been caught up in the reminiscences of what's past, not pasted." The Collinsport fly, we haven't mentioned him in a while. It's one of Keith's favorite animals on the show. And in 291, the famous Collinsport fly returns. And it's kind of famous because he was on Jonathan's head while he was doing a soliloquy, and it bothered Jonathan so much. He started to move, and the fly moved right with him, and he had to swat him. as he walked by. So that one's kind of good. That's in episode 291. Okay. We have in episode 292, Burke and Julia are talking in Collinwood, and the door is supposed to be totally closed, but through a crack in the door, you can see someone passing by the closed door as it opens. You got to be looking really, really fast for that. In episode 292, you're going to see Sharon Smith looking at the teleprompter sometimes as she's talking. That's okay. There was one episode actually when they were both in the mausoleum, and David and Sharon Smith as Sarah were talking, and they actually were both looking at the teleprompter, which was kind of cute. You're also going to see, interestingly enough, and I was going to mention it it's in the last block, if you look in the mausoleum, there are now 3 or 4 makeshift steps in order to get you down into the secret room. And if you guys remember back in episode 210 when the mausoleum was first introduced, you didn't have steps at all. Willie had to jump down from the main level into the secret room, I should say, of the mausoleum. Okay, you have a couple of episodes of Frid speak. At one point, he regarding Julia, he says that all we hope is that he will have the situation under control rather than she will have the situation under control. You will also see a shadow of the microphone on Frid's suit jacket. You don't see too many of those, interestingly enough. And again, an episode of Frid Speak, keep track of his every moment, when he meant to say keep track of his every movement. We have in episode 297, we have the Klieg light and the camera in the reflection of the mirror in Vicky's room. So look for that. That light is very, very bright. And let's end this by saying that just a piece of trivia: the names Niall Bradford and Ina O'Donnell. Do not expect to see those as main characters on the show. They are actually past references. Ina O'Donnell was Vicky's nurse when she was in the foundling home, and she talks about that in the conversation with Burke. And Niall Bradford is apparently a cousin of Barnabas, who he refers to when Burke is asking him about who he knows in England. And it turns out that Niall Bradford died 130 years ago. And that's the other thing about the fact that they're talking about things that happened 130 years ago, which would have put the show around 1847, when in reality that time period was not referred to. What they were talking about will be seen in future episodes when the cast goes back in time. So it's been a pleasure, and now let's get back to the show.
Sorry for the brief interruption, but I wanted to give you a gift. This is Jay Shear, author of the Amazon top-selling time travel novel Timeslingers and co-host of the Story Geeks podcast. We just released the Kindle edition of Death of a Bounty Hunter, our new supernatural steampunk Western novel, and I'd love for you to have it. With so many of us staying at home, we wanted to give you something. So we released the book early and discounted it to just 99 cents. You can learn more at deathofabountyhunter.com, but here's Mockingbird Preacher Witch, a character from the novel, to tell you what it's about.
This isn't a story about the man-ogre with a Gatling gun for an arm, or the Taiwan sorceress covered in tattoos, or even the long-winded banker. And while the speedster idiot and the large, very funny Pinkerton detective lady do play a role, it's not about them either. You might think this tale is about the Sheriff of Jericho, a man who will do just about anything to save a loved one, including work for a secret occultish society. And then there's a woman who bears the brunt of his sins and must defend herself when she's most vulnerable. All those characters appear in the story. I do too. But it's about more than that. The one I was assigned to, the Korean bounty hunter, he's at the dead center of it all. Flint, a bounty hunter who comes face to face with something we all do. Guilt and shame. And the desire to run from them. Not because we're cowards, but because sometimes we just can't stand ourselves. It's a story about that. The Gatling guns, the occult, the paranormal, and even the demon spawn. All those are just along for the ride. Mockingbird, Preacher, Witch. Like I said, I'm in the story. Just read it.
Mockingbird, Preacher, Witch is voiced by Anastasia Washington in the full cast audiobook coming out later this summer. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this gift from us to you while you stay at home. To get the Kindle edition for just 99 cents, visit deathofabountyhunter.com. That's deathofabountyhunter.com.
Hello, I'm Vicki Ray.
And I'm Jesse Foltz, and this is the Collinsport News.
Josette's old room has Victoria asleep with the musical tones of London Bridge playing on a loop to rockabye her into a lullaby fitful sleep, which really doesn't do the trick. This has more to do with Barnabas and his inappropriate behavior when somebody has a sleepover. He prepares to bite Victoria, which doesn't go to plan. Willie is not too comfortable with having an overnight guest in the house and not sure if this is because Willie wants to protect Victoria or is he afraid of Barnabas may find true love finally and leave him on the sidelines. Meanwhile, Barnabas suffers chomp dysfunction, the inability to bite Victoria.
Meanwhile, back at Collinwood, Elizabeth relents and lets Julia stay with them as she conducts research into the Collins family. It is anyone's guess that why should this happen considering that there's already a professional bound hardback book that seems to have all the relevant information. Whilst Julia literally makes herself at home, she questions David about Sarah. David apparently at some interval within the story has become Sarah's best friend because now they actively play together. What this means is anyone's guess because... Does this mean they sit on a log and sing endless refrains of London Bridge, play catch, and if they play hide and seek, doesn't Sarah have David at a disadvantage?
Yeah. Meanwhile, Julia goes to the old house and invites herself in. Julia appears to lack social graces, and she has very filters, I might add, as she tends to push Willie or anyone past when knocking on the doors. Taking the advice of Victoria, she asked Barnabas with her book in hand, and she's greatly amused by Julia's claims of authorship or to authorship. She finds that Barnabas doesn't show his reflection in a mirror, unlike the camera crew filming the scene behind them.
Julia bids her adieu, and Barnabas is torn over his munch dysfunction over Victoria. He is torn over his feelings, though she tends to be the perfect house guest. Is his love for Victoria more than his love of her turning into Josette? That evening, time of days and reflection of what day is which and how often night comes around is not one of Dark Shadow's forte. Julia sneaks in with cat-like thread and wanders around the house. Again, where the hell is Willie? Where does he go when he is not a nervous wreck? She eventually ends up in the basement of Barnabas Collins, and doesn't resist the urge to have a little look-see.
Yep.
Barnabas is there, fast asleep and dreaming of sheep or bats or Josette, really knows.
And flighty Victoria all of a sudden has come down with nemophobia, a fear of the past. Did I say that right? This may come down to Sarah poofing in and out of people's line of sight. Barnabas hovering over her bed while she is trying to sleep. He's such a dirty old man. And Josette's haunting tune on a constant repeat or refrains from London Bridge on a loop. Whatever has caused this has urged her to try to give back Josette's music box. And on a side note, it probably didn't help that everyone knows that outside of Barnabas told her over and over to stop living in the past because she's obsessed at this point.
That night, Barnabas creeps into Julia's room to kill the inquisitive middle-aged vixen when Julia snaps on the light and reveals that the bed is just a lump of pillows. She tells Barnabas that she knows what he is, and as she is top of her game as a doctor, she can cure him. Barnabas, of course, is looking at this charlatan who practices in the dark arts of medical care and does not quite believe her and decides he should strangle her anyway. Is it not weird that he would rather suck Willie's
I know.
Maggie's neck, but doesn't feed on Jason or Julia when it is basically a Meals on Wheels buffet? Is Barnabas an ageist? Does he only feed on the young? Anyway, Julia stops Barnabas from his crushing her windpipe by telling him that Maggie is still alive and she has been treating him. This causes Barnabas to pause his plan for the time being.
And there's David playing with his only friend, Sarah. Personally, David needs to join a club or some children's activities in town. This boy is going to have some real social anxieties as an adult. Think about it. Ghost girl as a best friend, ghost woman as a friend, compounded with his habitual lying and his patricide-like fantasies. Boy, he is going to make some woman a hell of a catch. Sarah tells David that Maggie is still alive as she cries with her tears. David thinks that the only way to cheer her up is with a hot dish made by Mrs. Johnson and brings her to Collinwood, where she waits in the entryway. David announces he is home, and as he goes to introduce Sarah, she has disappeared yet again. Victoria, Julia, and Passive Burke think he has a screw loose, and David runs upstairs to get away from the vulture squad. Victoria finds Sarah's cap on the floor. Lord, this girl drops everything everywhere. A doll here, a ball there, her cap. And it's just like, and they still don't think she's a tangible entity at this point.
I know. Victoria goes for a drive and finds an old house that she has fallen in love with. Well, she falls in love with everything that's in the past and that's old. And anyway, this probably explains the background pounding a couple of episodes ago. Hang on, Dark Shadows fan. We are getting a new set. Burke and Barnabas measuring dick sizes over their infatuation for Victoria by prying into each other's pasts. Barnabas gets flustered when Passive Burke gives a smarmy smile, which to be sure that, although intense, no one won this fight because before it can get really good, Victoria comes skipping down the stairs. Passive Burke wanted to wait until morning to take a gander at this house, where 3 mast schooners from the past sail by its windows, and Barnabas wants to go that night. As Victoria wet her knickers, they go that very evening, scoring 1 point for the love of Vicky, going to Barnabas.
Popping back to Wincliffe Sanatorium, which is 100 miles away, Sarah pops into Maggie's room, and together they hatch a plan for Maggie to escape. It seems that Sarah can now astrally project across many miles. While they work out their fiendish plan for escape back at Seaview, Barnabas and Burke are still waving their dicks in the air for the love of Vicky. Passive Burke is grumpy and poo-poo all the ideas of going upstairs or exploring. Barnabas, with his sharp eyesight in the dark, apparently can see no trespassing sign from 2 miles away, finds the house charming with its darkness and candlelight. He does not want electricity, this dude. Barnabas goes up to the attic to explore while Victoria tells Passive Burke off for being a Debbie Downer. Barnabas returns with an embroidered handkerchief that is not soiled or mouth-eaten and in pristine condition with the initials that spell FAC. Is this short for feck off? Or, I was going to say, whatever. Saying that, did anybody notice for a house that hasn't been lived in for decades, it has no cobwebs? I know, really, just like insta-clean.
Sarah helps Maggie escape, which basically is Maggie calling Miss Jackson, which predates Outcast and Panic at the Disco by almost 40 years. Maggie hides behind the door while Sarah sings her top 10 hit. London Bridge. The nurse asks Sarah what she is doing there, and Sarah plays dumb, not mentally incapacitated, but by unable to speak kind of dumb. Maggie slips out and locks Miss Jackson if you're nasty into the room. She spins around and Sarah has disappeared again. They are wandering in the woods, and Sarah does her slippery conversation act by never answering a question, but Maggie laughs and Sarah comments on how nice Maggie's laugh is. They continue walking. Really? Walking to Collinsport? Is this like over 100 miles or something? Anyway, Casper and Maggie maybe can float home. Who knows?
After viewing the house, Barnabas, Victoria, and Passive Burke end up at the swinging hangout called the Blue Whale, which plays incidental jazz, hip-hop dance music, which never really catches on. Catch it here, folks, for all those classic numbers. Victoria orders a scotch and water, Passive Burke a bourbon, which is basically the same thing. The love triangle is probably the most uncomfortable that it has ever been witnessed. Maggie appears at the Blue Whale instead of going home. I guess she figured her father probably lived there now. Vicky exclaims the obvious. It's Maggie Evans. Everybody looks at her except Barnabas, who thinks turning his back on her will make him invisible. She walks around him and looks at him and faints.
The shock is so great for Maggie that we are now in color and realize that Victoria's clothing color scheme looks better in black and white, and Maggie's dress is more dire than anticipated. Maggie comes to and plays 50 questions with Victoria whilst everyone stares at her. Barnabas is trying not to make eye contact while Passive Burke throws in a line or two. We find out that, in fact, it is Sarah who delivers Maggie to the Blue Whale. The real mystery is if Sarah delivered Maggie to her brother or to keep her safe. Maggie's incoherent communication skills suggest that they should take her back to Dr. Woodard's office. Does this mean back to Wincliffe, or does he have an office in town? And where the hell is Wincliffe Sanatorium? Does anyone know where this is?
Miles away. Barnabas is in an outrage as he comes back to confront Julia. Julie decides to hypnotize her to make her forget. It is also important to note that while Julia is on the phone, Barnabas does not respect her personal space. Using a hideous medallion that she received from somewhere, she hypnotizes Maggie, who forgets. As Maggie loses what happened during the kidnapping, she goes back to being old Maggie, and she is now back to black and white. We are literally back to the old Maggie.
Back to black. Maggie has no memory of her kidnapping except saying goodnight to Pops and going to bed. Dr. Woodard and Hoffman talk about Maggie's memory loss. They go back and forth as Dr. Woodard becomes suspicious. Sam asks Maggie about her memory loss, and seems that the only conversation Maggie's going to have for a while is questioning her memory loss. Although it probably needs to be pointed out that not sure how professional it is for Dr. Woodard tells Julia that the real reason that Maggie was at the sanitarium to pretend that she's dead. This doesn't seem to register to Maggie that she had to fake her own death. Maggie returns home. Joe stops by and they have a cuddling session.
Yeah. Julia reports back to Barnabas that she is taking care of Maggie's memory. Barnabas, with his trust issues, does not believe that Maggie has forgotten and plans to shorten her life.
We come up to the next morning with a colorful Joe, Sam, and Maggie talking about Maggie's memory loss. Maggie plays with Sarah's doll after changing out of her ugly bathrobe.
It was a wretched.
Sarah reappears wearing her cross near heart lace, and Sarah tells Maggie that she missed her as apparently Maggie is Sarah's best friend. Wonder what that means for David.
No kidding.
They play ball and sing a lively rendition of London Bridge, and Sarah gets her doll back, then disappears. Mickey then ponders about Sarah, and we get to see that Sam's painting are not big on a color palette. Barnabas pays a call to the Evans household, and after an awkward conversation with Sam, Mickey has a one-on-one with Barnabas and shows no memory of any kidnapping experience with the man. Barnabas is unconvinced. He plans to kill Maggie that night, but Sarah sings her greatest hits, which freaks out Barnabas, and he leaves.
Burke then arrives at Collinwood to speak to Elizabeth. Passive Burke wants to buy Seaview, which apparently is owned by Elizabeth. Is there anywhere that she doesn't own? Elizabeth finds the keys and the deed, but it is marked that it is not for sale, which she does not know anything about. Carolyn, Elizabeth, and Burke head down to the new house and have a gander around the place.
Vicky is with Maggie and questions her about her memory loss, and surprise, surprise, Maggie starts to get her memory back. I mean, even if she was innocent of murder after the rehash that she has been getting, she probably would have admitted to committing a crime. Let's look at this realistically. Within the last 24 hours, she's been poked, prodded, and made even more confused by everyone she has come in contact with. Julia comes a-calling to the Evans household and does her hocus-pocus hypnotizing routine with her ugly medallion. Maggie loses her memory, yet all in time, it takes Victoria to make a cup of tea.
Victoria is in the back garden dressed as a Greek muse when Barnabas appears. Barnabas does the flirting thing and asks her for a date, but apparently Victoria is hot and heavy with passive Burke. Julia interrupts their conversation and warns Barnabas to stay away from Victoria. Is Julia jealous of Victoria, or is she concerned about Victoria's safety? Victoria goes upstairs and tries to pick out which ugly dress she's going to wear for her big date with Burke. Curiously enough, Victoria asks Julia for her fashion advice. Has Victoria seen Julia's dresses? Julia warns Victoria of Barnabas's affection to her, and Victoria seems oblivious.
That's not too surprising.
No.
Burke takes Victoria on her date to the back garden with a running fountain, which causes pee anxiety amongst the viewers. Burke shows off his star knowledge, which seems to win Vicky over. Vicky decides to pay heed to her daddy issues and makes out with passive Burke. Barnabas oversees them and is not very pleased. Neither are we. Later, as they return to the main house, and Vicky, with past rash on her face, goes upstairs. Burke tells Julia to leave Vicky out of her research of the past. Burke is ready to take ownership of Vicky, and it looks like she may not have a mind of her own in the future. Julia states that she will keep Vicky away from her research. Upstairs, Barnabas does a creep around Vicky while she's fast asleep.
The next morning, Vicky wakes up thinking that somebody was in her room while she slumbered. She shares her feelings with Julia, who dismisses this. Elizabeth tells Victoria about Burke buying the Seaview house. Barnabas decides that stalking Vicky and Burke is the best way to keep tabs on them. He tells Willie that he will do this for him. Julia, on the other hand, with her stethoscope, meaning she is in doctor mode, tells Barnabas to stay away from Vicky or she will not cure him. Burke proposes to Vicky and tells her that he is buying the house for her. Great, a house with strings attached. Apparently now that Collinwood has a water feature, they will be making the most of it.
Barnabas finds out that Burke has asked Victoria to marry him, and he is not too pleased. Elizabeth tells Burke that he can have the house, and they have a drink. Burke goes to the Blue Whale and tells a lame story when Barnabas arrives after a strained conversation where Barnabas pretty much tells Burke that he's not overjoyed for him. He leaves. Burke makes a call to London. This causes Barnabas to ask Julia to hurry up the experiment so he can become human again and marry Victoria, because that's how things work.
Right now, anyway. And then Julia, Barnabas, and Elizabeth are having a conversation when Victoria and passive Burke come in and discuss that they are to be married. This is the quickest romance, considering that they never really dated before. Everyone is pleased except Barnabas, who looks like someone peed in his Cheerios and utters the words. Jeremiah, before Burke, glances over to him. Victoria asks Barnabas if he is happy for her, which he gives her a non-committal response before retiring into the back garden to talk to Julia, and she tries to reason with him.
Burke goes to discuss Maggie with Dr. Woodard. It seems that there are a lot of medical infringements going on here, and can a doctor discuss a patient's case so openly? Burke has a hunch about Barnabas, and he's trying to put the pieces together. Burke then goes to Maggie's house to help jog her memory. Joe and Burke work on Maggie, who seems that her memory loss is still working. Meanwhile, back at Collinwood, Victoria is listening to her music box when Burke comes a knocking. Burke is showing his jealousy over a music box, and for argument's sake, in color, passive Burke looks even older than aggressive Burke.
Burke makes the rounds and ends up at the old house during the day, of course. Willie answers the door wearing his dungarees. Obviously, he's doing a bit of farming. Burke tells Victoria to stay away from Barnabas, proving yet again that this marriage will soon be the subject of Sally, Jesse, Raphael, and probably be a parable based on domestic abuse.
Back at the old house, Barnabas is feeling down and out because of being Julia's guinea pig. He's also worried that Sarah's going to show up randomly everywhere to everyone except himself. Willie shows his concern for Barnabas. Julia arrives for the next bout of experimentation. Barnabas doesn't trust her, but is still going ahead with the injections. Barnabas confronts Julia about her experimentation, and Julia is aghast that Barnabas doesn't trust her. Personally, Barnabas should be more concerned over hygiene with medical experimentation and what is being injected. He wants these put on hold.
David meets Sarah in the woods or yard. David comments on how Sarah is mysterious, and she says that she has to be. Sarah is taking David to Eagle Hill Cemetery. David and Sarah go to Eagle Hill Cemetery. Sarah shows David the secret room in the mausoleum, and as a matter of fun, Sarah teaches David how to open a coffin. It is an empty coffin, and not sure what the signifies, considering that Barnabas' coffin was already in the old house. If this is Barnabas' sleeping place, who keeps moving his coffin from pillar to post?
Barnabas tells Victoria that Burke is having him investigated, and Victoria states that she will fight in his corner. Due to his previous conversation with Julia, violence is agreed to be put on hold with regards to Burke. Victoria informs Burke that if he doesn't stop his jealous rampage on Barnabas, she will end the engagement. Barnabas makes a journey to look at Sarah's grave.
Meanwhile, Sam is angry at Julia and tells her that she is lying about her treatment of Maggie. Julia goes on the defensive. Joe meets Victoria at the Blue Whale while she waits for Burke. They talk about Sarah as Maggie, and Sam join in on the fun. Maggie has the truth at the tip of her tongue but loses her train of thought. Joe and Sam are going on a search for Sarah.
Joe and Sam decide to go to Collinwood to talk to David about Sarah and maybe get introduced to her. They go on the search without any luck and share their ideas and understanding with Julia. Julia is cagey as normal and puts Sam on the defense, who runs off after giving Julia a piece of his mind. Joe tries to be the smooth negotiator and goes after Sam. Julia says smugly that she has it all under control. David and Carolyn come back on a shopping spree, and Sarah is still the topic of discussion whilst back at the Evans house. Maggie finds Sarah's doll on her bed. You know, she's just dropping stuff all over.
Everybody gets that doll at least one point or another.
Yeah.
Well, this concludes all the news in Collinport, Maine. I'm Vicki Ray, and it's a good night for me.
And I'm Jesse Foltz. It is a good night for me, and see you next time with the news from Collinsport, Maine.
Hello, welcome back to Elixir Relations Podcast, and we're discussing Dark Shadows, episodes 286 to 309, and we are shedding some light, where we'll be discussing about these episodes. So, Patrick, what did you think of these episodes of 286 to 309?
They start out really well because it's all about Julia Hoffman finding out about Barnabas and insinuating herself into his life and kind of threatening him into being cured by her. And he, of course, has now suddenly decided, after this obsession on Maggie, that I had it all wrong. No, it's Vicky. It's Vicky. Yeah. And the show really pulls a muscle trying to convince you. It almost gaslights you into thinking, oh no, it was Vicky all along, by Vicky visiting Josette's grave and all of this stuff. And then all the business with Burke and Barnabas' jealousy about Burke, and there's the whole cards and cutlasses scene in the Blue Whale. The show goes to color, which is great to see. And Vicky's got an amazing series of dresses that make her look like a race car driver from the future. With a stripe going down the side. And so that's a lot of fun. The show overall, Vicky becomes obsessed with Seaview Terrace. Burke proposes, which, we get to hear Burke Devlin Must Die, which I think was a James Blish novel. And thank you. And it becomes deadly very quickly. There is a wonderful reference early on into this where Barnabas starts talking about a painting of Jeremiah that no one sees because the props department was busy doing other things.
Yep.
And they said, Anthony George, we like you, but not that much. And he says, gee, it looks a lot like Burke Devlin. Gee, Jeremiah looks a lot like Burke Devlin, which is a little bit like I don't know, it would be an Easter egg if they had thought anyone, was like taking notes. But of course, it is the first thing that I think is setting up the 1795 story. This is all taking place around July, August. 1795 would be in November, which I think was around sweeps, maybe. And so they're building up towards that. And essentially, you've had this big storyline with Maggie captive. And then you have the big storyline with 1795. And we are in this kind of gulf in between. And there are some high points, but there are a lot of moments where episode upon episode upon episode just stretches by with Maggie maybe trying to find out where she was and what happened. But and poor Catherine Lee Scott does a fantastic job putting about 1 tablespoon of flour in a 10-pound sack. In that there's just not a lot for her to do, and she has to not do a lot for many episodes. And she does a great job, because I think it's easy to act captive. It's not as easy to be kind of a prisoner of existential memory loss with no stakes. Nice stuff with John Carlin, though. John Carlin has a great moment of sass towards Barnabas, where Barnabas is he's going on and on about how wonderful, who wouldn't want to be immortal? Who wouldn't want to live forever? Who wouldn't want to be forever young? He says, without aging, with this and with that. And as he's going out, he says, and you'll be without company also. And he says, you'll be very lonely. And Frid just kind of stops and then just keeps going. And it was a great moment. And that's this section of the show.
And what I thought was, I look upon it as I give this 2 subtitles, and one is "Where's My Memory," which is referring to Maggie. She's almost got it. She's almost remembers what happens to her, and then Julia comes in at the last minute and don't say another word, Maggie, in Dr. Woodard's office, and then proceeds to kick Woodard out and hypnotize her. Oh, yeah. And then she's like, hello, everybody. Well,
Woodard's so furious afterwards. He said, she just knew it. She just knew it. What happened?
What are you talking about? What are those sweet? And
the other one, Dr. Bellows on I Dream of Jeannie. The elephant was right here in Major Nelson's office.
That's a very good analogy. And the other title I have is 3 Coins in the Fountain, and that refers to the fountain. Now we see this is something Keith is now going to start pontificating about, because he kind of alluded to that in our last block. And the fountain set, which is really kind of, I like the way it looks. and on the Viewmaster reel, if anybody is lucky enough to still have the Dark Shadows Viewmaster reel that came out during that period of time, which you can see everything in 3D. It was really cool to see that they had a fountain scene in 3D, but it is basically where all the lovey-dovey stuff is taking place, and Vicky and Burke, and those kisses were so. I would have liked to have seen a lot more open mouth kissing, and I didn't see that at all. I just, it was like,
God, it's like a father kissing his teenage daughter. There's something wrong with that.
I know. It's like, ew.
Some old man drooling over some young chick. It's just like, oh no.
I can tell you, if it were Mitch Ryan there, those kisses would have been a lot hotter.
But even with Mitch Ryan, I mean, he was Burke Devlin is just too old for Carolyn or Vicky. I'm sorry, but I mean, he's like what, 40 some. I don't know how old he's in real life, but he looks about 40, and they look about like 20, like 18 to 20, and you're kind of going
easy.
Sugar daddy fixation, daddy issues, here we come, sort of thing.
Really censor, he really does. So I guess if you like your own uncle, you're not really gonna stray too far in like another older man somewhere else.
I mean, I have to sit there and say the water fountain feature is probably the worst thing they did, because I can tell you, working from a psychological point of view, that there is a psychological thing about running water with women, that when they hear water running, it makes them want to go to the bathroom. So I'm sure that women all across America, when this first aired, were running to the bathroom every time they went out to the fountain, because it's just water trickling the whole time. It just
this is why they knew the scenes weren't very interesting or convincing. So have most of your audience go into the loo, and by the time they come back, you're onto something else.
Precisely.
There you go.
But I had to sit there and say that, as far as the Vicky and Burke storyline goes, and then all of a sudden, I mean, it was kind of weird, because all of a sudden it's like, boom, they're an item, and you're kind of like, where did this come from?
Yeah, it is kind of dark.
And then now they're being pushed towards marriage proposals, so we're kind of going into this storyline as well. And I sit there say that it just doesn't feel organic enough, and I kind of wish that the writers or Dan Curtis would have put his hand in his pocket and introduced maybe some younger guys into the mix. They did have some younger guys that kind of got dropped off.
I tell you, Frank Garner, I think would have been perfect. Now, that would have been a really interesting thing if they had kept Frank Garner and there was a rivalry between Frank Garner and Burke.
Well, the problem with the Burke character is that Burke's storyline was all centered around that car crash. Then once that car crash was finished, and that storyline is like, what do we do with this? Basically, the skin tag. Yeah, and that's pretty much what he is. And they kind of bring him into like, there's that storyline's finished up, so we'll get Burke in to be the knight of shining armor. So go in and save the day and disappear. Come in and save the day and disappear.
They are setting up a rivalry with a younger man, and it's going to be Roger Davis.
Yeah, that's later on.
I mean, that's coming up. And one of the ways, because I have a lot of different ways of watching the show. Mm-hmm. One of the ways I like to watch the show is from Barnabas's timeline rather than Victoria's. See, you do the Victoria stuff before Barnabas gets released out of the coffin, and then when you go to the seance, you just skip to the next 1968 episode, and you eliminate everything else because you've already seen it. And so from that point of view, Jeff Clark is right around the corner.
Yeah. And we will be talking about that later on for the new fans. We're essentially concentrating on this block, but that as a hint, that's going to be very, very exciting.
I don't think there's nothing wrong with throwing a few tidbits out there to keep people interested.
Well,
the other tidbit I think is really important is that both Louis Edmonds and Anthony George look like Super Marionation characters from Jerry Anderson. If you look at that cut of his chin, Burke kind of looks like Troy Tempest. And especially early on, if you look at the way Roger's head's kind of bobbling around, he looks like somebody off Thunderbirds. And this is important. This is text. And I don't know how involved Jerry Anderson was with the production, But I think his execution of those two actors on their days off was fantastic.
Well, they should have played "I Want to Be a Fireball" the Blue Whale. I want
Right.
to be a fireball every time.
That's a great moment in that movie.
Into
It's an important moment.
starry eyes. I love that song. I
Was it
love
Cliff
that.
Richards?
What's that?
Is it Cliff Richards who sang that?
I believe so. I believe
In the
so.
movie, yeah.
I believe. Well, it wasn't a movie. It was a cartoon. It was a Saturday morning.
Oh, wait,
cartoon
that's
film.
Fireball XL5.
That's Fireball XL5.
Oh, I'm
sure.
thinking about the musical number in Thunderbirds Are Go.
Oh, okay.
Shooting
No.
Star.
No, I mean Jerry Anderson. Didn't Jerry Anderson do Fireball XL5? I think he did.
He sure did. It was his
Yep.
third big
Yep.
series.
Yep.
He also did
Loved it.
Space 1999 as well, didn't he?
Yes.
As well.
Yes. But I just love the fire. We should have something on Fireball XL5, Keith. But
I have to sit there and say that what I don't understand in this segment, and now that they brought Anthony George in to do, and I call Anthony George passive Burke, because it's just everything's so passive. He's any more passive, and he'd be basically just cat litter. And I find that what I find quite interesting is that when they changed Willie. Well, because we had we had sexual assault Willie, then that changed to John Carlin's Willie, which they actually rounded out his character to play to John Carlin's strengths. And I don't understand why they didn't do that with the Burke Devlin character. Now they got a new Burke Devlin, and the thing is, Anthony George has now been in it for quite a few episodes now.
Right.
He was in the last segment, and we're getting more of him now. And I kind of wonder why the writers should start writing to his strength. There's kind of like they're still, were they expecting Mitchell Ryan to come back at any point? Or?
Right.
No, they weren't.
No,
they
but
weren't.
I have a theory, and I really don't like saying negative things about an actor because there are a lot of very positive things about Anthony George. But
Yes.
I'm going to throw out there that compared to Mitch Ryan, Anthony George, God bless his soul, maybe did not have as strong a palette of strengths.
He has a totally different countenance, I thought.
Yes.
But, not to jump ahead, but he's a great Jeremiah, I thought. So
Yes,
He's
and that
wonderful.
will be seen. But as I said in prior podcasts, Anthony George, from my research, was a nice guy actor. He was used to playing nice guys on The Untouchables and other episodes, and he was really miscast, except there's one scene in this block which I thought was very interesting. And that's when he had to confront Willie. And because he's looking for Barnabas and he's pissed off, and he goes in and he goes to the old house, and he's been watching Barnabas himself, and he goes in the old house and he says, I want to see him. I want to see him now. And I'm not going to take any. And do you know something? When I saw that scene, that reminded me of Mitch Ryan. That reminded me that I don't know whether Anthony George talked to them and said, you got to give me something. I'm sick and tired of playing the cutesy poo nice guy. You got to give me something bad to do. And he came and he let Willie have it. And I was impressed. So when we put the pedal to the metal, he could have done that. It was the writer's fault for not having him do that more.
Well, but I also think that what they could have done basically is, now that the Burke storyline was kind of finished, and basically, obviously, he's made peace with the Collins family, because now he's kind of like becoming like this new member of the Collins family.
Yep.
And because everything seemed to be smoothed over between, Roger and that fateful night in the car all those many years ago, that they could have changed his character. They could have changed the way that he reacted. They kind of made it as like, okay, we're still got aggressive Burke here, aggressive Burke's coming in, da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
But the thing is, he didn't need to be aggressive. They could have actually softened Burke's character and made him very, very likable. And they could still give him heroic moments and things like this. But if they softened him to play to Anthony George's strengths, then what you would have got was kind of like these kind of tender moments between him and Victoria. But what we get is kind of, in this, especially in this segment here, if Victoria marries Burke Devlin, then Burke Devlin's not going to be the perfect husband, because he's quite aggressive with everything. Like, you're going to do this, you're not going to do that.
Right.
I want you to do this. You're not going to do
she's
that.
already saying she has to give up her job, which is a very disturbing moment from that time period. That just reminds us how different it was. So there's that. There's another thing. You mentioned the car crash. And who's missing from this block of episodes?
Roger.
Roger, which I think makes a lot of the politics within the House possible. Because I can't imagine, even with the detente, Roger having a lot of good things to say about his son's governess running off with Burke Devlin.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's kind of another odd thing. I mean, and unfortunately, Barnabas kind of makes a show, but he kind of tears the show apart.
He does. He sucks all the oxygen out of Louis Edmonds.
Because what happens is we got these established characters that we do love, and all of a sudden they're kind of being thrown to the side.
Yeah.
Barnabas, and sometimes I wondered if the writers were able to juggle things a little bit better. That maybe we could have had some really interesting stuff going on with these characters that have been thrown to the side, and have them interplay more in with some of the storylines.
I think we missed out on a few good interactions. I agree with you on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, once again, it was Barnabas Collins' personal picture show, and that was what they were going after, and it was. But I still think there are some. I still think there are some good moments. I think Grayson Hall shines in this particular segment. I think you really now.
Oh, she's marvelous, especially early on. She has so much to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But now, I mean, not so much in the last segment because she had just been introduced in 265, but around thereabouts. But in this segment, you really start to see her get into fights with Barnabas about she's being now the traditional doctor that she started out as, and she's barking orders, and Barnabas is intimidated, and he's not going to take it. And in fact, he has a nice little speech where he says to her, I don't know about modern men, but I'm not going to be treated like this. And you're
Jesse,
not.
What was your thought? Jesse had a thought. I didn't want him to lose it.
Oh, I didn't see. Go ahead, Jesse. Talk. Open.
Shoot, I don't think I was going to remember. What were we talking about? I'm thinking back to.
Well,
Roger and Burke.
Oh yeah, the reason why I had a theory about why it was mostly just about Barnabas. I think they were trying to play up the supernatural elements because that's what was getting them views. So that's probably mostly wanted to do with the other characters, especially with Burke and Roger. I mean, maybe Louis Edmonds was doing other stuff. I don't know why he wasn't more featured in this, this little bout of episodes, but.
Could have been on holiday.
Yeah. So. They missed an opportunity there. There's no doubt about that. When Liz and Burke were making up, and now, and it was just there was just something so false about it because Liz was so pissed at him. And
now it's like, oh, we're so happy that you're going to get married to Vicky. And you're like, what?
I mean, it's
when did this happen?
And get the house and buy the house. By the way, the name of the house is Seaview.
It's Seaview, like Seaview Terrace.
And that's exactly right. And I was going to mention that. I forgot to mention that in the blooper.
Also,
Seaview Terrace in Newport, Rhode Island. Go ahead, Jesse.
Also, I think that Elizabeth, regardless of her relationship with Roger, I think Elizabeth would stand behind because. I've always been under the impression that wealthy families, especially the Collinses, would stand behind one another, and whoever was in there.
They're all. It's true. It depends on the Collinses. David's of course trying to kill his father frequently, but other than that, yes, you're right.
Well, not anymore.
Well, blood is always going to be thicker than water.
Yes.
So even though
they
might be at odds with inside themselves, they will always pull together. They always do kind of pull together and show a united front against any outsiders.
I think that's very much a journey that the show has taken to this point. Because, boy, if you look at episode 1, Rogers, and Liz are really kind of at each other's throats. But by this point, I wonder if the outside influence of Burke and the outside threat of Burke was the first really cohesive action that brought them together.
Yeah, and now that's gone, and Louis Edmonds was probably doing Broadway at that point, which is probably why they
he was doing what?
Broadway. He was probably doing Broadway.
Oh yeah. Well, he did that. Speaking of Oscar Wilde, he did that Importance of Being Earnest musical.
Oh, there you go. That's why. So that's why he wasn't on. Yeah, Dan Curtis was very liberal. He gave the stars time off to do their stuff. So but that being said, I think there's getting back. I was really impressed by Grayson Hall with this block because she put herself forward. He could have, I just felt Frid was kind of. I just think Frid should have bitten her, instead of the strangling her or the pillow, or whatever. But there was no doubt that she really came to the fore, and in this block, for the first time, you really see the establishment of the triumvirate between Barnabas, Willie, and Julia, as I call it, just like Kirk, Spock, and McCoy from Star Trek. You've got Barnabas, you've got and how the two of them start to interplay with each other. And this was one of the things that made the show work for so long. And you'll see later on when John Carlin takes leaves of absences from the show, and you've just got Julia and Barnabas, there's something missing. There is definitely something, you can feel it. So this is a great segment to watch. Plus everything's in color, for God's sake. So everything is 60s, and the blue whale set looks terrific. With all
a lot of garish colors though as well.
Yeah.
I have
to show off that color of your television, we're going to use as many garish colors as possible to show the full spectrum of your TV screen.
But especially if those old sets, if you use the tint. Remember using the tint when you were trying to adjust, you couldn't adjust the color back then. And so the tint, they all looked purple and green, and it was really, so if you played around with that, you really had a psychedelic trip without taking the LSD.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is this: at what point in this, does anyone know at what point in this did they make the determination to keep Dr. Hoffman around and to keep Barnabas around, because she was brought in as the Van Helsing character?
Yes.
But at some point the decision was made, and I have a strong feeling it was over the course of these episodes.
I agree with you. I think
ratings.
I agree.
Well,
Go ahead.
I guess, personally, as far as Julia Hoffman is concerned, and being portrayed by Grayson Hall, I have to sit there and say that she probably was a bit of a milestone for daytime soap opera. You're finding a woman who is a strong, independent woman who knows her own mind. She doesn't need a man to satisfy her. She doesn't need a man
Go figure.
But she doesn't need a man to sit there and get her ahead in her career. She gets ahead in her career because of who she is and how smart she is. And she does things on her own terms, and she's nobody's fool. So to have a female character in 1967,
betcha,
at this time must have been quite a breath of fresh air for a lot of viewers at this point.
Well, a lot of women were the ones watching.
Because if you look at what what nighttime television was, we had Bewitched, though Samantha was the servant to Darren. You had I Dream of Jeannie, which basically Jeannie was the servant to the master. You had even regular TV shows up until the Avengers was coming around a year later, where you had Emma Peel being a strong female character. But you didn't really have strong female characters at that time. So I think that maybe she ticked some boxes for a lot of housewives who were watching Dark Shadows at the time, because she was a strong, independent woman, which is very rare for this time period.
But did they have to put her in that disgusting green jacket?
Well, I think that has to do more with I have this vision of the reason why I think the late 60s television were as colorful as they were, and I think it's the same thing what Hollywood did when Technicolor first came in. They try to throw as many colors on the screen so they can show off how many colors they have.
Yes,
because I'm sure that because even with Dark Shadows, even when you come down to the candles are all quite. They're not your regular colored candles that you see. They're kind of like,
that's right.
You got black candles, neon blue candles, neon green candles, and they're all going to be spattered around, but still, that lovely, Afghan on the back of Maggie Evans.
That's what they started. Absolutely.
Pretty much still holds all the colors.
And did you notice also the blue screen effect? They started to use the blue screen effect in this block, which was essentially where they were able to, and they called it because it was a blue screen, but they put In this case, it was the countryside. And but they were able to superimpose other images onto that, and they use that very profusely later on in the show with ghosts, and you look in the mirror and you can see the future and all kinds of stuff.
Chroma key.
Yes, that's the other name for it, but it's the blue screen effect or the chroma key effect. But yeah, and they started to use that here. And so right away they're experimenting, and I think that's stuff that other soap operas didn't do.
Well, not only were they experimented with no increase in budget from what they had before and what most average soap operas had, which is really extraordinary.
Yep. Well, Curtis was and it is extraordinary considering that Curtis was very, very tight with the budget. That's why he let all the bloopers go through. So I think that's, but once again, you still have a blooper I forgot to mention I don't know if any of you caught it. Vicky has a bracelet. And in one scene, she's like wearing the bracelet, but there's like kind of like a circle, a gold circle attached to the bracelet, and it was on her palm. And so she's wearing that thing, and she knows that you can see the thing on her palm. It's really not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be hanging down. So she keeps opening and closing her hands. But you don't see as many bloopers this time around.
I do have a query, basically. Maybe Patrick might know, or yourself, Tom, or someone. Mm-hmm. What I don't understand about Barnabas' kills. First of all, he, in the last he kills Jason McGuire, and basically it's a free meal. He doesn't feed off him. Right. Why would he choke Julia and not suck out her blood? I never understood why he would rather
choke her. A lot, though. If you noticed, like he could have other characters before and past. Exactly. It's the thing. It's like the Vulcan death grip thing he's got going, and I think that's just part of his forte.
Yeah, but it's like it's a free meal. Instead of like mutilating cows in the farm next door, like he's been.
Oh, that's right.
This is like a free meal.
I think what it was is that she smoked menthols. Just didn't like the taste.
I still like when she lights her cigarettes off his candelabra.
Oh my God!
Yes, you see that in this one. You see that in this section.
Like a boss. I love it.
Maybe garlicky and ever.
What, Jesse?
What's that?
You regularly ate garlic and we just didn't know. I mean, that would
a lot of Italian restaurants.
Now this is. We also have in this segment where Dark Shadows writers should have gone and got a medical dictionary and learned some medical facts, because now we have a psychiatrist who's now an immunologist. I don't know how that worked.
She's fantastic.
Well, remember, under the law, they can practice.
An immunologist.
Under the law, they can practice whatever they want to practice. By the way, as long as they don't get caught. Once they get the medical school.
But yeah, you have to think. I work as a psychiatrist, and I had to sit there and say that I don't know much about immunology at all. Not enough to be able to sit there and try to cure someone who they think has a virus, a vampire virus. And another thing I have to sit there and say as well is, like, God forbid, if you are a patient in Collinsport and you are seeing any of these doctors, patient confidentiality is right out the window, because they'll just
I was just thinking that
Tom, Dick, or Harry as they come in.
They tell everybody everything. It's like Burke Devlin walks in and he's talking to the doctor. He goes, "Well, I want to know about this." Yeah, they just spills the whole.
I know.
Well, but to be fair,
I would if I did that at work, I would be fired the next day.
But to be fair, this was before HIPAA came along, at least 40 years before HIPAA, which is the law in America anyway, which prohibits, which speaks to confidentiality of medical records, which is very strictly enforced. But before that came along, I think it was free game. So you got to at least give them a pass there. It's implied, by the way, because they do mention that there have been no attacks in the village for a while, and I think it's been implied, but it was never really stated, that the treatment that Julia started to give him was working. In fact, there was one blooper where they started it in the middle of a scene. I was shocked to see. I mean, she's talking to him. It obviously had to be edited out for some reason. But I think that's I think that's probably why you don't see a lot of biting this time around. And so when he decides to try and kill people, it'll be like with Maggie. He was going to smother her with a pillow, and then he hears Sarah's voice, and Sarah's another thing that we should discuss. But
I think Barnabas is an ageist.
Oh, chill. Everything.
I think he's an ageist. I think he's against middle-aged women and middle-aged men.
He
only likes to suck off the youngsters. He only likes to suck the youngsters.
I have a couple of geeky theories about this. One of them is that it seems clear over the course of the series, Barnabas doesn't really need to feed that way because he's as you say he's not attacking people very often, especially at this point. So, a couple of things. One, it could be how much power he needs to use. Because by the time he's getting to 1897, he's dematerializing. He's doing all sorts of stuff.
That's later.
And so that could be in direct relation to his feeding. The other thing with him not feeding is that a comparison I was thinking about a little while ago, probably because they both have luxurious manes of curly hair, is Greatest American Hero. Mm-hmm. And in the TV show Greatest American Hero, one of the things that happens to Ralph is he gets this suit and he has absolutely no guidebook.
Right,
he has nothing
I love that
to help him with this. He's not, he gets converted to being a vampire, not with the help of another vampire or anything like that, but, due to this curse. And so he's feeling his way through. Mm-hmm. And he may simply be feeding on people, kind of like an aspect of the Netflix Dracula that we just saw, partially because he thinks he has to. But it may not be as essential to who he is as a standard vampire.
But also, he's a reluctant vampire. Remember, that was why the whole thing took off. Sure. That's why the whole thing, I mean, and that's why he doesn't just go at it, as opposed to somebody we're going to see later on, and that's Angelique. But
he's still a living creature. He still needs substance. I mean, can he eat? Does he drink or eat? Or?
Well, it's interesting.
I've noticed him drink before. I've saw him drink.
He was in the beginning, but now in this block, he's in the Blue Whale. He buys everybody
to
drinks,
drink, but he doesn't.
He doesn't. He lifts the glass and then he puts it down.
Which is what normally vampires do in a social setting like that. When you see when you've seen them in other films and stuff like that, they always pretend to drink or pretend to eat. So.
Yeah, and so
especially if they're all sparkly and stuff.
Yeah, they got more into that.
Well, even Anne Rice's vampires did that as well. They knew how to hide the food, make it look like they were eating.
Now, the thing about the mirror, by the way, and I thought that was, my God, I mean, they really could have, that was straight out of the Van Helsing when Julia opens her makeup case and finds out that he has no reflection. But what you really see is they showed you the candelabra. They didn't show you the entire room. In actuality, if they had shown you the entire room when Barnabas is standing next to the candelabra. Now, if you didn't see a reflection there, that would have been a more appropriate way of seeing that. So just looking at the candelabra doesn't tell you anything. It was just what they were able to do, I think, in terms of the effect.
Mm-hmm.
I have to sit there and say that there's, these episodes are a lot stronger than last month. Last month was a total, well, excuse my language, shit show, really. But I think that I do like going into Sarah Collins.
Yes.
I like that Sarah's basically turning into a chess piece and a pawn that basically she's starting to move and it's almost like a game of chess, how Sarah's operating herself within all the inhabitants and the way that she's actually getting closer to Barnabas. And I think this is very, very clever, the way that the writers
so cryptic.
I don't even know if they did it deliberately, though. I think it was by accident that this kind of happened. But I think a lot of that kind of happened because they were just winging it. I don't really think there was as much thought put into it. I think it just kind of was magically just brilliant somehow. And I thought that was cool too. And I think that made, and because of Barnabas's connection with Sarah, it made that more fascinating too.
The double entendres also are very, very prominent. I think that's what makes the show really shine. And I've said that before, and I think the one that really sticks to mind was Burke and Barnabas from the Blue Whale, and Vicky has accepted Burke's proposal, and Barnabas and Burke is talking about celebration, and Barnabas says, "Soon I will have something to celebrate," and Burke says, "Will I be included in your celebration?" And with classic Frid, he says, "I assure you it would be nothing without you." And he's talking about killing Burke.
It's just the beginning of a pissing contest, basically.
Yeah, but they talk about the duel concept, about should we use sabers or is it just a game of cards? That was very well. I thought that was a nice little writing, gaffe. And
otherwise, you won't know anything until the sabers are drawn.
Exactly.
And there's nothing phallic about that whatsoever. Absolutely nothing.
But the idea but Burke really is being a domineering. He's really threatened. He's really threatened.
Well, I have to say though, I kind of find it refreshing when a man acts like a man, because we've been so deprived of it in the last decade or so, where men just, don't get that Cary Grant action going on with that nice looking overcoat. Not that you want them that over domineering or anything, but I think that's appealing to a lot of people, even though they won't admit it, how it translates into this decade. But
it's
that's
possible.
I'm a girl, I wouldn't know anything.
Oh, come on.
I have to sit there and say that I do find it very interesting that there are no moths in Collinsport, Maine, because they get clothes. Last month they get clothes out of a chest, and there's no moth. This time Barnabas goes to Seaview, goes upstairs and finds a handkerchief that's pretty much cleaned and washed and pressed to give to Victoria. I have to sit there and say that it'd be fantastic to do laundry up in Collinsport.
my mother would take.
Did you ever wonder who does all the cooking before Mrs.
Johnson.
Mrs. Johnson gets there.
Oh, Matthew Morgan.
Matthew Morgan did it.
Doing the laundry, it's
Matthew
like
Morgan.
doing all the stuff.
Matthew Morgan did everything.
Yeah, I guess he did.
If Matthew Morgan did the cooking, all I can picture is probably like Blazing Saddles with like beans and.
Hey, want some more beans, Mr. Morgan? I should say you had enough.
Well, from what I understand, Mrs. Johnson's cooking was no big deal either.
Was it Roger doesn't like it? I know that.
That's
her
exactly
roast
right.
beef was fresh. She was obsessed with fresh roast beef.
It was great. So.
Well, I think that's the reason why Sarah disappeared when she showed up when David brought her into the house.
You're very
coming for dinner. Mrs. Johnson's cooking. Bye.
Yep, Sarah was a smart cookie. She knew who was going to cook the meal. That was it.
I'm out of here.
That's probably why she left the hat there. Did you see when she left the cap? It was very interesting when they first found the cap, and then in the credits, somebody left the cap on the table. And looking at it, I didn't realize that when I first looked at it, and I thought it looked like a paper, like a plastic garbage bag or something like that. And I almost wrote that down as a blooper. Somebody left a garbage bag on the table, but that was Sarah's hat, which was kind of cute.
I have to sit there and say that Sarah's whole career character arc through ever since she's on here is she basically has a doll, loses it, has a ball, loses it, finds a doll, loses it, finds the ball, loses it. She spends her whole time just dropping things everywhere she goes, so it's kind of bizarre.
I did it on purpose because I thought they were trying to do it. I thought Sarah was doing it deliberately to kind of I don't know, let her presence be known or use it as like a hint, but then it just became kind of redundant and it didn't seem to suit a purpose of any kind. So I don't know. I thought it was intended to be kind of a hint or a sign at first for some reason, but I don't remember if it is or not.
Another thing I couldn't understand was why, when Sarah took David to the mausoleum, and there's Sarah's tomb right there, and David's trying to figure out who Sarah was. And all he had to do was look at the tomb, which says Sarah Collins, and the years of dates and years of death, and there it is right there. And then he knows. But no, they completely ignored that one. They just went to the...
How they accept the way that girl's dressed, and no one even really question about that is beyond me as well. It's like, But then saying that, I mean, I think that there's one thing that we need to discuss here. What writer is responsible to have Julia Hoffman give Victoria dress advice, but what dress would be better for her to wear? I found that, he's like, we get the whole scene where Julia goes up to Victoria's room and Victoria's looking at these two dresses, one uglier than the other. And then she asks, which one do you think I should wear? And you're like, hey, you're asking Julia which dress to wear? Have you seen the way Julia dresses?
That green, she likes that green.
Acetate green, isn't it? Acetate
I don't know
green.
what it is, but I don't know what it is about. I remember moving into our house for the first time when, like, late 60s, early 70s. I was a little girl. I remember that green. It was on the walls. Just like, what is that shit?
Hello.
Well, that brown pocketbook, and that's later on, but then you'll see the
that
famous
pocketbook.
brown pocketbook.
Oh, my God. That's a total fashion risk. That pocketbook. She takes it with her to
I have to admit, though.
She takes it with her everywhere.
I know, but they did. Women, but women did in those days. Look at my grandmother. No matter where she went, she had her pocketbook with her. No matter where she went, she'd go across the street. She go.
That's true. I digress.
Go to the supermarket.
Right.
So true. So true.
She'd run over small children, and she still had that pocketbook.
She takes it to the old house with her every time she goes. She just takes that pocketbook everywhere, man. Gotta love her, though.
I do like with Julia, basically, when she gets in doctor's mode, she has her stethoscope on.
I know.
When she's in author mode, she's with her pocketbook. But when she's in doctor mode, she's got her stethoscope on.
Well, you're going to see later on in bloopers when she takes a blood pressure and she forgets to put the stethoscope in her ear.
Right.
My classic. That's the one I love. But we do see, and once again, we see the interplay, by the way, between Dr. Woodard, Robert Geringer, and Grayson Hall, and I always enjoy that because, and now they talk about more about her medical school when, and I think they had that conversation. Did you ever, when Julia's trying to bond with him and said, when you were in medical school, did you ever want to do anything great? And he looks and he whispers, yeah, I did once, instead of becoming a technician, which is what he ended up as, a superb technician. But so Julia's got that now. Look what we can now do and make our names enshrined in the heavens. And he's like, what? Can I tag along? Well, only up to a certain extent. But I do like that interplay between the two characters.
She's a strong character. That's one of the things I like about the segment, like Keith brought up. Because women were watching the show really worse at home, cooking and taking care of the kids and for the most part and everything else. So it was great to see strong women emerge. And it's just awesome.
But she wasn't the only strong character. Liz also was the very...
Oh, yeah, Liz takes no shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but she's still, up until this point, we're going to see Elizabeth now. Well, we're hoping that Elizabeth will evolve a little bit. I don't think she ever does go out on that shopping trip now that she doesn't have to feel guilty about Paul's daughter. But she's still kind of held hostage to a man, really. She might be the strong matriarch sort, but she is still, she is basically stuck at Collinsport because up until this point, Collinswood up to this point because of the murder, the body that she thinks is in the basement at this point.
Right.
So she's still she's still kept prisoner by a man, even though it's his memory, sort of.
Jesse, you were trying to say something? Jesse?
Yeah, that's why I dislike that whole storyline first off. But, with the Paul Stoddard, that just, I never liked any of that. I liked the idea of Jason blackmailing her, but that whole storyline was bad. But I think Julia was also, she was an interesting character, really fascinating for multiple reasons. That was probably one of them for that time. So I don't think anyone at that time really thought of that. that way because they didn't have anything to compare it to, and they weren't being told politically, oh, you have to like strong female characters or you can't like them. I just don't think they were around. But also Julia, it was like using science fiction. It was like science fiction and fantasy, kind of blurring the lines with, doctors and mixing, with the supernatural, because typically doctors, try to dissuade people from believing that the supernatural exists. They don't, this kind of blurred the lines and kind of allowed Julia to believe in the supernatural and kind of stepping into that world with that belief and finding a way to kind of blur the lines between the two. And I think that's what fascinated me the most about her character. And I think that was always intended because, like I said in one of the earlier podcasts we did, I think that Dave Woodard and Julia Hoffman were working on these weird kind of beliefs and projects or something, because I think Dave Woodard introduced Sam and Joe saying that she had weird unconventional methods. So I think it was always intended that she was going to be that sort of character, but I've always found it fascinating because of that.
Keith, what were our grandmothers carrying in those purses back then? I just want to know. I'm just like still hung up on the purse.
Butterscotch. I know that had butterscotch candies in there.
So was my mother. That's so funny, Keith. I haven't thought of that in too long. But yeah, it was butterscotch candies. But I used to insist that she get Reed's mints. I don't think they make Reed's mints.
I guess they didn't have Werther's Originals around then.
Tissues. They always had tissues with like
tissues.
Okay. Tissues. Yes, tissues
with lipstick marks on it because they were like. And they always had like great. And they also had a person there with their money, which was always
that's right, the change purse. Oh, my grandmother had
change, and then one with $1. And then they, of course, had the one where they had all the family pictures in it.
That's true.
That's right.
I knew there had to be a reason.
Yeah, and sometimes they would have a scarf in there as well in case the wind was blowing, and they had to
put that thing on. Oh my God, my mother even wore those.
It would be very interesting. What did Julia have in her pocketbook? That would have been very interesting.
Well, she had a scarf. I think Julia would put a scarf over her hair because, at the end of the day, she'd have to wrap that hair up every day before she went to bed.
I think she did. Yeah.
She probably used Aquanet, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Aquanet. That's.
Julia. Going back to what Jesse was saying, I kind of wonder because at the end of the day, I don't think it was, I don't think it's conscientious what you're saying. I agree with that. But I guess this goes back to that Julia Hoffman was supposed to be a man. Right. And they changed it at the last minute. So I'm kind of wondering if Julia Hoffman's lines were actually still written for a man and they just changed the pronoun to she. Because if you think about her, some of the lines that she does say and some of the stuff there is that they could be said by a male doctor.
Right.
So maybe that's the reason why we got. And they kind of done that again in films later on. If you ever seen the film done by the Wachowski brothers called Bound, and that was about a man and a woman. What they did, they changed the sex of the person, but didn't change the script at all, and made Gina Gershon's. They cast Gina Gershon playing against Jennifer Tilly, and it works very well. So maybe that maybe Julia Hoffman was probably the first prototype for that kind of thing to do that. Maybe that's the reason why she's that strong.
It's interesting that you mention that because this is quite accidental. But in episode 293, you have an example of what I'm now calling Fritz speak, where he actually says he's supposed to say that she, meaning Julia, has the situation completely under control. But instead of saying she, he says that he has the situation completely under control.
Yeah, they might not have fixed all traces of the original, the gender of Julia Hoffman.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the reason why it works. If the picture of it was Julius Hoffman and it was a male doing all this stuff,
that's what they intended originally.
Yeah, I don't think it been the same thing. Dynamics.
But I think it works very well. Hit this way, it was kind of like out of the park for women at that time. That's why I look at it. I don't care how they did it, but I think it was needed and it was the time.
Absolutely. Now,
I think we need to sit there and talk about the hounding of Meggie. which is very, very prevalent in this, that Maggie's basically escapes. I don't know how, I mean.
That's another thing. I agree with you.
As far as distance here goes, as far as where the sanatorium is and where Colin's
100 miles away, and she walks with Sarah, and she walks with Sarah, and doesn't even get her feet sore.
She teleports, or what's the word I want to use? She's orbiting.
And I have to say that as far as ghost lore is concerned, I mean, I didn't realize that ghosts could travel that far. I always thought that ghosts are kind of like, because I think that at some point Sarah doesn't actually, not Sarah, but I think there's other ghosts that I think we're going to come in contact with later in the series that basically ground sort of thing. But obviously Sarah can. And then you have that, and then when she does show up, and I have to sit there and say that Julia Hoffman, because of this, has made me deathly scared of people with really ugly brooches. I can never look at ugly brooches. I'm starting to eyes now. But I do have to wonder if what is basically really going on here as far as all that hounding of Maggie. I mean, it's kind of like, could you imagine, like, okay, let's sit there and say that someone gets murdered, and by the time everyone hounds you, that I'm sure you did it, I'm sure you did it, I'm sure you did it, you would think by the end of it that you actually murdered the person. And they kind of do this really odd thing with Maggie where everyone's hounding her. Why don't you remember? You must remember. And it kind of feels a bit uncomfortable. Patrick's muted. Well,
it's very intimidating, I would think, from a psychological standpoint. And I mean, what's going on? What's going on here? Julia, but again, nobody's supposed to know that Julia's treating her. But the obvious tack would be, maybe Woodard should have done that, was to have everybody say to her, well, don't start to try her to make her, but again, that's a plot device. And that's what's really, I think, going on. That whole block focuses around, will Maggie remember it, and will she be? And if Maggie remembers it, then Barnabas's cover is completely blown. So,
but you do kind of wonder if they were a bit more gentler with it. The chances of her remembering probably would have been a bit better. It's almost like they were kind of like yelling and screaming at her, and you're kind of going, from a viewer's point of view, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, it's like, God, if I couldn't remember something, let's sit there and remember something, and all of a sudden I forgot everything. And let's sit there and say that you got dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever, and you don't remember something. The worst thing you can do is yell at someone to remember, because it actually makes it worse.
Right. Do you think when Maggie walked into the Blue Whale,
it's true.
that she actually saw Barnabas and recognized him?
Yes.
My questions.
And then she fainted.
Yeah.
And then she fainted.
Yeah, she fainted.
And that
that could have been from jogging 100 miles.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Well, I like the way that Barnabas thinks.
She's probably dehydrated.
I like the way that Barnabas is like a child, though. Is like, if I turn my back and I don't look at her, she can't see me.
I love those faces. Those faces that Frid did were just so classic to the show. And then you have the music in the background. Dum, dum, dum. And Frid is like looking, aping to the camera, and and it is and everybody else. I mean, everybody is frozen in time. And since we're speaking about that scene, who is that cute looking blonde? I wish I could find out who she was. She was in a couple of those Blue Whale. She was a Blue Whale expert.
Oh, the hair hopper, the one with the hair on top of her.
Yeah. Oh, she was cute. I mean,
she's a hair hopper. Dressed up like a teenage Jezebel.
God, I mean, I was like, well, they finally got somebody. They had a couple of ringers, except for that soft porno star from a few episodes back, Audrey Campbell. But did you know about her, by the way, Patrick? Audrey Campbell.
Wait, hold on. So a long period of silence from me, and to get me to talk, you mentioned porn. Okay, continue.
Well, Patrick, I figured
Collinsford Historical Society guy will know all about this.
Well,
no, I don't. Tell me everything.
As a historian, I would think you would be very interested. Or
No. I need this penetrating insight. What is going on here?
Pardon the pun, right?
Audrey Campbell was one of the Blue Whale extras. I would say 40 episodes ago, and it turns out she had a background. She was a 60s soft porn star.
Good for her.
That's the way I look at it.
I think you can only. She got her start at the Blue Whale. I'll tell you that much.
Well, I bet you Pornhub's made a lot of money the last 2 months. I can tell you that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, let's face it. I mean, if you're going to the Blue Whale, what are you picking up? Semen. We all know what's good. We all know things like that.
Lame.
Oh my!
What do you do with a drunken sailor? Bring back Bill Malloy. All right.
She's probably there, on the docks, getting off ship. Want a date? Want a date? Baby needs a new pair of shoes.
Roger, fancy meeting you here. Anyway.
Well, probably Roger. Roger was so asexual. I don't think.
I know. How did Roger even produce a son?
Roger
with Burke's help.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
exactly
I think
right.
David's Burke's son, actually. So I always thought that, actually. They do hint around at that, which they kind of like dropped.
Oh,
They
and by
mentioned
the
it in
way,
the
Carolyn is taking David to Bangor. So we have that coming up. We have that happening again.
On business.
Well, of course but it's not the kind of business you would think of.
Well, it was good to see that that the retail therapy was alive and well in Collinsport for at least one day. So
Brewster's was an important place.
That's funny.
Now, I have to sit there and say that what we basically get is, by the end of this block, we do get Sarah kind of coming in and out, and Sarah's line's starting to get bigger and bigger here. And that unfortunate, refrain of London Bridge playing over and over. But
Why did you torture us with that song? It wasn't because of copyright?
Yeah, I think it was cheap copyright.
Another
cheap
song.
It was a cheap.
Do you think that some of the expanding role of Sarah just had to do with the fact that Sharon Smith was getting older and they got more and more confident in her ability to handle larger and larger chunks of dialogue and scenes?
To do with it?
I think I do. Yeah, I think that's it as well. I think that whenever you I always find that when you normally put children in any kind of television show, that they have very little to do, and then as they get better and better, they start giving them more to do. So that probably does make sense.
She was such a cute little girl. I mean, she's such a charming child too. I mean, but I loved watching her.
Well, speaking about menopause babies, I mean, Sarah must have been one, because, I mean, look at the age difference between Sarah and Barnabas. It's like little sister, big brother. It's like, what
it happens. Oh, my God. Happens.
Well,
Joshua must have gotten drunk one night and walked into the room.
Well, there's like 40 years difference between Sarah and Barnabas.
Naomi, do you have anything? Do you have any liquor on hand? Do you have any sherry, Naomi? And one thing led to another.
There is and there isn't, and this is the weird thing, because I think Barnabas is only supposed to be about 27.
Yeah,
I think when we see gravestones, when we go back to 1795 and so on, they play fast and loose with the age that he's supposed to be. And I keep thinking of that moment in What We Do in the Shadows when one of the vampires talks about, being bitten as a teenager, and that's why he still looks like a teenager. And he says, life was really rough back then.
I have to agree. I think that, I mean, if you look at, I mean, we'll get, this is a precursor to what's coming, folks. But when we do get into 1795 and we do get the Barnabas storyline that's thrown out, and the storyline that they gave him, that he would have to be the age that you've said he was, because any older and he's kind of be pathetic. Because he needs to be married to carry the family name on, so on and so forth. He's betrothed to this woman, and to be honest, in those days, I mean, you're lucky if you lived to be 40, in those days. So I think that he probably would be, the oldest he could be is 27, but he probably should have been about 21, 22, really.
Sure. But, one of the nice things is that even though theoretically that's the age of the character, you can't get away from the fact that Fred's in his mid-40s. And the nice thing about that is that it adds to the sense of sadness and melancholy and even, arguably desperation that Barnabas has romantically when he's dealing with these people.
But why does he stalk them while they're sleeping? Like poor Victoria, she's telling Julie. It's
well, I think that's a hangover from Bram Stoker, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's a nod to Bram Stoker. That whole lurking why the heroine is asleep,
and you're going to see that changing. You're going to see that changing later. He'll just attack them while they're.
And it allows the production to have it both ways, which is one of the things. in that on one hand, you're seeing things from the woman's point of view, from the audience's point of view, of, oh my God, I'm so vulnerable when I'm asleep. It's right up there with the shower moment in Psycho.
Right, exactly.
And then at the same time, you're seeing it from Barnabas's point of view as this very kind of sad, lonely voyeur who can only be honest and only be himself with these people if they're not paying attention.
Well, I guess Barnabas is wearing a mask the whole time, isn't it? And the only time that he isn't, the only time he is his own true self is when he is stalking for his love to be, and he's so desperate. I mean, we got someone who is so much wants love, so much craving for love.
Yes,
he'll do anything for that love,
and this answers a question that you brought up. Somebody brought up earlier in the discussion, which is, why does he not kill Julia? Because Julia is one of the only people he can be himself around.
Yeah, and she'll let him put the chokehold on her every once in a while, and she forgives him all the time.
Well, another thing is, Julie is the only person that's there because she wants to be. Willie's there because he's captive. Maggie was captive, and Julie is there because she wants to be there.
Right.
A marvelous observation, yes.
And also, you talk about why doesn't Barnabas attack Julia? Well, this is, and I don't want to give it away, but much later on in the series, Barnabas almost does attack Julia. And I'm not going to say when that happened. Patrick, you may know what I'm talking about. 1840.
Pretty much.
1840. That's right. Even the dog didn't want to know that. 1840 timeline. But he almost bites Julia under circumstances which, tune in, fans, because you'll see when that happens later on.
But I guess the movie of Dark Shadows is basically that's basically how the show should have been going, really. And because they went to a different direction, it's almost like, well, this is what we're going to do. So this is what Dark Shadows is supposed to do with Barnabas. And basically, all those endings we would have got all those endings that we got in the movie in the TV series, if they didn't decide to go a different way, which I think that's
they could
very, very wise. But
the censors wouldn't let him. The censors wouldn't let him go that way. That was why when the movie came around, Curtis wanted to do what he could not do on the show, and had a big fight with Jonathan, because Jonathan wanted the original Barnabas to be more the sympathetic vampire, to be more in the movie. But Curtis overruled him, and that Barnabas wound up being a more traditional Dracula type character.
Well, I think the movie was weaker for it. Honestly, when I watched it, I was actually disappointed by it. It didn't have or include all the substance that the show provided, and the show was far from perfect, but because there was so much more to work with, and they were dealing with very unique concepts that we had yet to see, I think it made the movie really kind of unrecognizable to the original. But I'm glad that if there's an option to at least, as long as we had the show and the movie, I think it's perfectly fine. But imagine if we didn't have both, then it would be a completely different universe.
Well, the fans were very happy to transition, though. I mean, the fans knew. I think there was some disappointment that he wasn't more the sympathetic vampire that they came to know and love. And we discussed that in a prior podcast on the movie. But the fans who never saw it, but the people who never knew about Dark Shadows and just saw the movie, that was just a regular, it was just another vampire horror movie to them. But it did lack a dimension. I agree, Jesse.
I mean, I think the movie. My only problem with the movie is the quick editing, the sloppy editing through it, sort of thing. There's some kind of like really jarring editing that kind of goes what sort of thing. But I think that so basically, I think that the Julia endings and the Barnabas endings and stuff like that were first proposed for Dark Shadows, wasn't it? Then when they decided to carry on with these characters, then what we got is these characters or relationships are a bit more advanced than what we do get in the film. As I do agree that it's probably better for you, sort of things. But now. Yeah, I guess. I mean, at the end of this, basically, we get Maggie finds Sarah's doll in the bed, and then we kind of cut to chase, sort of thing. So I think We've kind of exhausted these episodes, so I think what we're going to do now is we're going to character breaks, where we discuss our favorite character of these episodes and our least favorite character from these episodes. And let's start with Jesse. Who's your favorite character from these episodes and your least favorite character from these episodes?
Definitely Julia first, and of course Barnabas was always one of my favorites. But Julia was a new, interesting character, and I think I liked her from the beginning just because, she stands out completely from everybody else on the show. That's, her personality is like a stark contrast to everybody else. And the fact that she's dealing with, like you said earlier, the supernatural elements, and she's, a doctor and isn't telling everybody to ignore that something supernatural and crazy is going on. She's secretly like going on her own, she has her own agency going about trying to solve this supernatural mystery kind of on her own. Actually, she doesn't have the help of anybody else. It's just her and her little pocketbook and her little red notebook that she hides from Barnabas not so well.
You be doing it.
Exactly. So I think she's probably one of my favorite characters. She really makes the show during the Barnabas era. And if she wasn't on there with that, it definitely would be a different show. And I'm kind of glad they didn't kill her off like they initially had planned on doing.
And what about yourself, Tom? Who's your favorite character and least favorite character of these episodes?
I agree with Jesse. I think that Grayson Hall should be the best. I think she stands out. I think that she really, establishes a presence with all the Collinwood characters. Interesting. At one point, Vicky has a little bit of a contretemps, I think, with Julia because she thinks that Julia is talking negatively about Barnabas. And I thought that was so. See, Vicky actually, that's a little bit of the Vicky that we originally knew. A little every once in a while that long lost strength comes out. But Julia, I want to give honorable mention to Anthony George, who in that one scene with Willie showed what if the writers only let Anthony George do that with Burke most of the time. And then mixed a little, instead of making him more lovey-dovey, which tended to compare them too much with Mitch Ryan. So definitely honorable mention. So now the worst. I'm going. It's kind of hard, but I'm just going to say Joan Bennett. I just didn't like the idea of Joan Bennett, being such a. At the end, playing nice with Burke. There was just something very false to that. I think it was what the writers had her do.
They did flip-flop.
Yeah. I agree. She was stronger she was much stronger in the last episode block. So I would say that for her in this one.
What about yourself, Patrick? Who is your favorite character of these episodes and your least favorite character?
Well, my least favorite character would probably be Vicky. I think that she's pretty dull. I don't think that she has a lot to do. She gets goo-goo-eyed over a house, and that's about the extent of it. And Vicky is kind of a character who's good to have more interesting things happen around, and that's what's happening here. She started out as kind of this Nancy Drew type, and I don't think the show could really support it. And then we have now entered a universe with vampires, and once you go there, you're going to have to go a long ways out of the way. And I think she also suffered, of course, from the fact that she didn't look enough like the portrait for her to be used initially as the ghost of Josette, which is why in all the iterations afterwards, I think all two of them, she is the Josette analog, because she's theoretically your protagonist. Most interesting character for me, of course, I would go back to Barnabas. Barnabas is in a very interesting transitional period. He is very slowly kind of coming to terms with the fact that he still has a sense of morality and has some moral agency. But at the same time, he spent 171 years, something like that, in semi-suspended animation, obsessing with the reasons that he's been in semi-suspended animation. And that's all got to do with Josette. So this idea that he's just very, very, very desperate to recapture what he lost, and at the same time slowly coming around to realizing that that world's not going to come back, is a tug of war that is beginning here, and he's living with a lot of conflicted feelings over the kidnapping of Maggie. So that's always going to be fascinating for me to watch.
What about yourself, Vicky? What's your favorites?
I would have to say my favorite character was Maggie, because she had so many highs and lows, with what was going on with her character during this segment. I mean, she had to portray, just being in like the nut house. I don't know what kind of nut house they had her in. That was just kind of a freaky place. But I really liked, all of her range that was shown in this segment. And I have to agree with I believe Patrick when it comes to Vicky. She really doesn't have a whole lot going on right now. I wish they would have done some more with her, but she kind of dwindled away. It's sort of like getting one of your best friends finally gets a boyfriend and she never calls you anymore. It's kind of so that's what I thought. But I love everybody. I'm really kind of sad that I don't see my Louis Edmonds come in as strong as he used to.
He'll be back.
That's why you get sad when they're not able to showcase what they have, because that these are all good actors.
Exactly.
And even like Alexandra Moltke, like she was a great actress. She didn't do really any more acting after Dark Shadows, but she really named Victoria, and Victoria would have been a really lame character if Alexandra Moltke wasn't the character. It wasn't the actress playing, because she wasn't doing a lot after her storyline was kind of just ignored. And I can see why she didn't want to come back after her pregnancy, because she wasn't being given anything. And I think that's what she expressed in the interviews, because she wanted to take evil fun roles, like being possessed and being witched.
She wanted to be a vampire. She wanted to be a vampire, and they wouldn't give it to her.
She had to be the character.
I think any of those ingenue kind of roles always kind of suffer that, don't they? I mean, she's just a female ingenue sort of thing.
Well, that's why Catherine Lee Scott liked playing Lady Kitty Hampshire so much. It was a nice departure.
That was later on. Actually, I thought that was more like she played her more like Tara in Gone with the Wind. Although she didn't feel that way, but that of course is another story. But Catherine Lee Scott had an enormous opportunity, even in this block, to go from the waitress. We discussed this, the small town waitress with a bit of with a kind of very strong, and then that was softened, and then when she went crazy, it really gave Catherine Lee Scott the chance to explore her total acting range, and she really was very, very well done.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
Now, as far as my least favorite, I'm still going to go with Passive Burke.
That's the first. That guy is great, Keith.
You just don't let it go, do you, Keith?
Well, I this has nothing to do with the actor. I do kind of wish that the writers would have written to his strengths.
Agreed.
And it's really kind of hard to see him. It's just there's a lot of things that don't ring true. The jealousy seems kind of weird. The overhanded, you're marrying me and I'm going to own you doesn't sit well with me. And it's kind of like, and because this is going on and everyone's seeing this, no one's saying anything about it. So, and it's not the actor's fault really. I do blame the writers here. I think that they had a good opportunity that they. Burke hadn't been seen for a while, so and then when we see him, we do get a new actor, and they could have softened him and done. They could have done a Willie for him, or they could have done Sam for him, because they did the same thing when they played Sam. They wrote to David Ford's strengths, and I think they could have done this with Passive Burke. And it's just kind of like, and its passive aggressiveness doesn't sit well. And the relationship between him and Vicky it's just really, really weird. I don't feel comfortable with it. And it's hard to see where this is going. I do know that, I know that when we do go into another timeline that he's going to shine. But as far as him playing the part of Burke, it doesn't really work for me. As far as the strengths go, I have to tie this with I call it the trilogy, and the reason why I call it the trilogy is because we have this triangle of characters. We have Barnabas at the side, we have Willie at the left, and we have Julia at the right.
Right, the triangle.
And this triangle works so well together, and because you have you have this lovesick vampire who's torn and wants to be good and basically has this love for the Collins name and family and history, but at the same time, he's torn over the love. Then you got the pragmatic Julia there who's basically like, looking for, basically befriending him. And then we got Willie who's kind of got this odd love for Barnabas all of a sudden. He's gone from being a captive. I don't know if it's Stockholm syndrome or what's going on with
it is.
But he has this love for Barnabas, and he'll do whatever to protect Barnabas. But I also like
he was
That's
true.
But
I think it's beyond that now, because he bit Willie quite a few years back, and to be honest, he bit Maggie, but because Maggie hasn't been bitten any longer.
Well,
and he's not feeding off Willie. So that hold on Willie should have been gone, really. So Willie's there because he wants to be. Her.
There's so many inconsistencies because, vampirism was still being experimented on. So it's not like there's this she built around like how bites or whatever, or like giving blood works. There wasn't a lot of information.
But I think what you have to do is you got to hold and respect that. Okay, he bit Maggie. Maggie was torn, and then he had control over Maggie, but then Maggie didn't have control over Maggie for a while. Then he doesn't have control over Maggie now. So basically, using that template for him biting Willie, and he bit Willie once. So any hold that he has over Willie is gone. It was
almost maybe he bites him behind closed doors. We don't know.
His wrist had no bite marks on it, so that we know that.
But we don't see them actually anymore.
But I do think that there's a really interesting thing about Willie that works very, very well, because you have this triangle that's working, and they're kind of like, and they kind of balance each other out. So it's kind of hard to pick one without the other sort of thing for me. And I do like the way that I like the pathos of Willie. I like the pragmaticness of Julia, and I love the torn, emotional, tormented Barnabas. And I think that three, and then when they're together, everything shines all of a sudden. Everything like lifts, and almost becomes like a three-dimensional television show when those three are together.
That's, I think, when it's at its peak, when you have those characters together. That's, I think, when it's at its peak. Because later on, when it does just kind of become Barnabas and Julia, it does lose some of its magic, because it's
exactly
on the newer the newly introduced characters, and sometimes they don't hold up as well as the original characters. I don't know if it's just the actors or if it's the writing, or maybe a bit of both, but some of them aren't as convincing as the original cast and how they interacted with Barnabas and Julia and Willie. And I don't remember where the heck Willie goes later on in the series, to be honest. I don't really remember, but he's not as prevalent. I guess he's playing other versions of himself in other timelines or something, like Carl. He does a number of
things. And, Carlin had a number of roles in the show, but Willie kind of fades off into the dust much later on. He winds up with some woman, or he meets some woman, and there's a kind of a hint that he's gonna take off and marry her and stuff like that. And, but that's later. That's much later.
Yeah. So for these in this block, I think the three of them come off as very, very strong together. Mm-hmm. So when on their own, not so much, but when you get them together, they come off really strong. So. Mm-hmm. So I guess what we do is our morning has broken. We'll talk about our final thoughts. So Vicky, what are your final thoughts of this block of episodes?
Well, I like them. I think it ties up everything to a nice little neat package for things that are coming. I think that there's a lot of transition and a lot of change, But, you know, for people who, I don't know, I always keep saying you have to watch the prior seasons before this for it to make any sense. I know a lot of people just like to just jump into episode 200, whatever, for Barnabas. But I always say, please watch everything before that because it makes all this sense. But no, I enjoyed this block of Dark Shadows. I found some a bit humorous and sad, and it kind of just runs the gamut for me.
And what about yourself, Tom?
Well, as I said, the episodes, I think they were basically, with the exception of the fountain stuff, which is just, there was a point where it was getting very soap opera-ish. The thing with the thing with Vicky and Burke and the marriage proposal and the whole thing, very, very soap opera-ish. And that, I think, kind of detracted to a certain, they didn't have to spend so much time on it, for God's sakes. But aside from that, the supernatural elements were well done. And what fascinated me most was the concept of what I call the possession element. That Burke wanting to possess Vicky, Barnabas wanting to possess Vicky when he got the chance. That whole concept of, it's not a normal kind of love when you want to possess somebody in a relationship, and that of course will cause problems. But in Dark Shadows, that is, I think that's really the first time we've seen it on a multi-dimensional level, not just on Barnabas' side, but on Burke's side as well. Jesse, you look like you were thinking like Dobie Gillis. What were you going to say?
Yeah. I wanted to add, I think Barnabas wanted...
You froze, Jess.
Oh, he's frozen.
Up.
Sorry, it's cutting out.
Say, Jesse.
Say that again.
I don't think Barnabas wanted to possess Vicky. He wanted to possess Maggie, and I think he realized that's where he went wrong, because he was going to do things the way he did them with Maggie, but he always stopped himself. He wanted to pursue her more naturally, which is why there was that dynamic between her and Burke. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had to worry as much and could have just gone to a room and, he wanted a loving vessel, kind of the way that, Angelique's not on the show yet, so I won't talk about her. But he wanted someone who wanted him
right.
for, naturally, the way that, regular people have relationships, which is why he wanted Julia to amplify the tests and the procedures so that way he could become human faster.
Well, if you think of it, though, there's a battle going on in him, because in the beginning of this block, he does talk about, originally, actually, he did want her to be the next Josette, and he's talking about how he can do it. But then, as you say, he comes to the conclusion later that maybe the way to go about this is not what he did with Maggie, but to take it a lot slower. And that way, he's able to be really smart. There's still this... Eventually, he's going to want to possess Vicky again, but he's just holding off on it, and it enables him, and it enables Burke to trip up, because Burke definitely wants, in his own way, is very possessive of her, and he's jealous of Barnabas, but he makes a lot of faux pas, and Vicky calls him out on it, and then Barnabas comes out smelling like a rose. So that, I think that, but the whole concept of possession is really starting to develop here. That's my point. It's fascinating, and you're going to see that throughout the show.
What about your Jesse? What are your final thoughts?
Let's see. My final thoughts. I do overall kind of like this storyline. It is kind of the beginning of a new era with the introduction of Julia, because you have... Barnabas is coming off the heels of like Laura Collins and all that. And then you introduce a new version of Burke, which actually they completely changed. Aside from his character, it's like the minute they changed the actor, all of a sudden you realize that Burke and Vicky are somehow all of a sudden super in love. And they've been in a relationship for a long time. And all of a sudden it's this sappy romance, which I think, when you involve that in from the change of Burke, it just makes everything feel very strange and convoluted and not genuine. So you got that going on, and the sappy, fountain scenes where you're just
Sappy Burke.
They make that, and that's like all that they do in their relationship. They don't do anything. He's just always barking up, barking up her tree, I guess, and trying to spoil her fun and saying that she has to be the way that he wants. Otherwise, I don't know. I'm not sure. There's no real threat there except that he's just going to be angry with her. He's going to give her a good time. And he's going to give it to her real good. He said something like that, and I just thought it was hysterical. It sounded so. But that night when she wanted to stay in because she wanted to, listen to the music box and read that book that Barnabas gave her.
The music box. Yes, we forgot the music box.
Because she has no personality right now except that music box. And
that's right.
Oh, I'm getting so tired of that old theme. I can't wait till they switch to the.
Because everyone acts like the past is like actually going to come and snag her up and take her away, or as if she's just going to fall into this past coma and never come out of it.
She's kind of delusional, isn't she?
I mean, she is, but all the other characters surrounding her when they talk about it are too. So it makes her look like more of an idiot. It's like the past is not actually that bad. Like some of us actually like, learning about that stuff, like archaeologists, like, there are multiple jobs where you look into the past and learn from it. But I guess from all angles, everyone's a little delusional when they talk about it. It's some kind of force field or portal that you just get sucked up in and can't come back from. I don't know. I just thought it was weird all the way around.
And what about yourself, Patrick? What are your final thoughts?
I think there are parts of the series that are more fulfilling for me. Because you gotta be kind, because every song is somebody's favorite song.
That's right.
And every part of the series is somebody's favorite part of the series. One of the things that I really like about Dark Shadows is that although it provides a half hour of entertainment every day, eventually the writers, I feel like, learn that they don't have to write a soap opera per se. I mean, there will always be soap operatic elements, but as the show goes on, they pack more and more plot in, which a lot of people complain about, and I'm baffled by that complaint.
Me too.
It was a lot of fun watching it. It was a lot of fun.
They keep the story moving. It's far more dynamic. And this is that section of the series where I think they are still stuck in the timeline of soap opera storytelling. And it really shows. It's this part of the series. I get the feel we're not supposed to talk too much about what's going to come,
right?
But this part of the series will feel very alien.
Yeah,
200 episodes down the line, and for a good reason. So for me, this is the stuff I concentrate on because I get to choose any episode to write about that's filmed on that day. Because of that conceit, this is not a period of the show that I come back to very often. And there's a reason for that. It's necessary. There's some good stuff in there. But could you cut it down to a 2.5 hour best of? Yeah. You could very easily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have to agree. I think as far as my final thoughts of these episodes, I think they're better than the last month's. Last episodes that we've done. I think they're a bit stronger than that. I think that they dropped the ball a bit with the Paul Stoddard storyline a little bit, and I felt a bit cheated. But I do think that I kind of wish that sometimes that the writers would let things breathe a little bit. I think that in order for the Victoria and Burke romance to play off for me, they kind of should have done what classic television always done, like what they've done with Bruce Willis' character and Sybil Shepherd in Moonlighting, or what they did with Rachel and Ross, and where you had this thing where are they going to get there? Will they get sort of thing. And then when they did get together, we'd be like, oh, yay, sort of thing. But what we kind of go like, what are they doing together, sort of thing.
Right.
But I did like the. But there are some little gold nuggets that we do find in these episodes, and I do think that the information about the mystery behind Sarah starting to become a bit more intriguing. She's no longer the irritating girl that pops in and out of cells, and I quite like that with her. I also quite like the simple fact that the Maggie storyline is now coming to a close, and we're getting the tail end of how they're winding this up, and it feels like they're going to wind this up a bit more satisfactory than they have done with other storylines that we've had in the past. I do think that I like the way that Barnabas is learning lessons and they're carrying his character arc. Because what we've noticed before in Dark Shadows is that a character will go through this huge change, and then a couple episodes later they've gone back to square one, like we've done with Nancy Barrett's character, with Carolyn, so on and so forth. So I like that Barnabas is learning and he's changing the way he's thinking and he's changing things up with his pursuit of Victoria, and I think that was very, very clever. But I had to sit there and say that, 3 or 4 months from now, am I going to remember a lot of this block? Probably not, but I think I'm going to remember bits and pieces of it.
In fact, I am going to say one thing in terms of the Maggie thing now with Barnabas being they revisited in a later block, and I don't want to get too much into that, but they will revisit that in a later block. I guess they were they didn't know what to do, and they were stuck with new ideas. So they do come back to this for a bit, and then they resolve it again.
So that brings us to the end of the Literary License Podcast discussing Dark Shadows Point, episodes 266 to 285. Come to us next week. We'll be covering Edgar Allan Poe's let's try that again. Come to us next week. We'll be discussing Edgar Allan Poe's Premature Burial. We will be doing the short story by Edgar Allan Poe, and we'll also be covering the film with Ray Milland. We'll also make sure that people know that they can also find us on our website at www.llpodcast.com. Make sure you do sign up to our newsletter that comes out once a month, and you could win yourself a Literary License Podcast t-shirt that we'll be giving out through the summer. So 2 people will be winning those per month. So all you need to do is when you get the newsletter, answer the question, send us an email to info@llpodcast.com, and you can be having your very own colored t-shirt with whatever color you want. And of course, you can also find us on our social media, which also includes Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and various other platformers. And of course, Pinterest, if you're looking for interesting pictures from any of our episodes that we're talking about, make sure you go to Pinterest and you'll find some interesting pictures from all our episodes, from the films and the books that we do cover. So I want to thank Patrick McRae for joining us for this episode of Dark Shadows. Thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's time to say goodnight. So good night, Vicki.
Good night, all.
Good night, Jesse.
Good night.
Good night, Tom.
Good night. Always a pleasure.
And good night, Patrick.
Good night.
And we'll be seeing you next week for the Premature Burial with Ray Milland and the Edgar Allan Poe short story.
This has been a Literary License Podcast production. If you cry for help, there's no help for you.